Pro West is the only one up there that's already upgraded to version 12. But so you're seeing something that even our customers up there may or may not have seen yet. But it's been out for a year now, and it's a brand new rewrite of the software from the ground up. Okay. So let's jump right in here. So I'm just going to log into the Edge using a username and a password. And in this case, the company that I'm working with has 4 licenses of the Edge, 2 review and 2 standard licenses. And I'll kind of get into what the difference is later on. But right now, I'm just going to check one of these licenses out. Some of our other customers out there still have to use these little USB keys that you plug into your computer to give you access to the program.
Yep.
Yeah, so now that's all virtual. It's a virtual key, and now all of our data is in the cloud. So as long as you have a computer with the Edge on it and an internet connection, you have access no matter where you are, at home, at the office, at a coffee shop or whatever. You have access to all of your data, and you don't need to worry about bringing one of those little keys along with you. Okay. I'm just going to jump right in to start a new bid. We'll call this Kodiak Drywall Edge Demo. Okay. And this is where we can start to put in information like the address, what the job status is, if you want to be able to sort by bid numbers. You can also set up locales. And I'm not sure if this would apply to what you're doing, but do you work in other regions where the pay rates may differ?
Yep.
Okay. So you can pre-set up locales in the Edge with a preset pay rates for that particular locale and what your markups might be. The tax rate may be different. The overhead might be more if you're traveling to a certain area. So you can preset those up in the Edge. Okay. Now I'm going to jump out here and load any blueprints that might apply to this particular job. Here we've got most file types that you can load in, but most popular being the PDF, the TIFF files, and the actual CAD files. But if you use any of these other services to get prints, there's some other extensions as well. But you find that you get the
PDF,
the line
99%
PDF.
of everything.
Good. And the PDFs load into the Edge just fine. They don't take any time. I'm going to go out here and see. I've got some prints out here. Let's see, where did I do these? Right. Got a lot of plans on here. I just want to make sure I grab the right ones. Looks like I moved them around. Okay. So I'm going to grab a few of these. You can load in as many prints as you'd like into the Edge. In here it'll load in. So I've got some details. I've got a couple of pages for takeoff of some architecturals. So I'm just going to tell it for these 2 are the only ones I'm going to do measuring on. I'm not going to do any measuring on the 3rd one. Have you used any of these on-screen measuring tools in the past?
Here and there, but not to any great extent, no.
Okay. Well, one of the things I want to point out with a lot of those other takeoff softwares, they point to where you saved that PDF. So say you saved your PDF to your desktop, and if you accidentally delete that later on from your desktop or you move it somewhere else, those on-screen, those other measuring programs, they lose connection because they're actually pointing to where you saved it. The Edge actually stores these prints that you load into it in the Edge job file. So if you accidentally delete it from your desktop or something like that, it doesn't matter. The Edge has a separate backup set of those prints stored in the actual Edge job file itself. So now I've brought those 3 prints in. I've told it which ones I want to do takeoff from. Here we're starting off in the Edge with what we call the scenario tab. The scenarios might be different markup scenarios. If you wanted to do a scenario at 10% markup, a scenario at 20% markup. Otherwise, we're just going to stick with one scenario. And then we have our sections. Sections may be things like drywall in a separate area for T-bar and a separate area for, rough or finished carpentry. Some people use the sections to create alternates, so you can have main bid and then alternate 1, alternate 2 as other sections. Also, if you have a super large job and you need to have multiple estimators working on this estimate, you can have, for instance, a 15-story hospital or something like that. One person can be working on section 1, which is floors 1 through 5. Someone else can be on section 2, floors 6 through 10, and so on. And you can have 3 people actually working inside of the same estimate if you wanted to. Okay.
Do you have multiple users with the same file open at the same time as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd basically, in the Edge, we call them collaboration tools, and you're checking out your own section or you're checking it back in. So for us more old school people that used to use libraries back in the day, it's almost like checking out. You have the main library, which is the Edge job, and then you're checking out your own book basically from that library. And when you're done with your part of it, you're checking it back into the main library. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good. So now here are these 2 pages that I brought into the job. I'm just going to go into the first page and start building some conditions. And I'm just going to give you an idea of how the different conditions work in the Edge. We have our partition conditions. So I'll bring in an exterior wall. I'll bring in an interior wall. Maybe I'll bring in a column, some corner bead, and some door buck studs. I'll bring in a ceiling and a soffit. And when I mean soffit, I'm talking like an L soffit. Is that, you know what I mean if I say like a 6-foot drop and a 2-foot return?
Yeah, bulkhead.
Bulkhead, okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I was working with a company in the middle of the states in Arkansas, and they actually refer to them as fur downs there. So it's kind of interesting to see the different terminology. And I used it, hopefully I used that right for acoustical. I think in BC you refer to like acoustical ceilings as T-bar.
Either or.
Okay, cool. All right, so I've loaded these particular conditions into this job. And at this point, you can start building them for what that particular job calls for. To do that, I'm just going to go into the properties of this exterior partition, and we're going to be answering some partition-specific questions. So first, it's going to ask me my stud centers, stud gauge, stud width, length of the stud that we're using here. Say I was using a 15-foot stud, and the length that we're ordering. This type, some people use this if you're specifying like a CSJ or something like that. You can leave it blank and it just assumes it's a standard metal stud. Some people are starting to use the metal names like an S500, 625 or something like that.
Yeah, and see those meters yet?
Yep, so you can do that. And what the Edge is doing here, when I change that stud to 16 gauge, is it's changing the gauge for my track as well. So it's trying to auto feed some of these numbers. I changed that to 20 gauge, my track gets changed to 20 gauge. So it's trying to auto feed some of these numbers here. And then track, I've got 2 runs of track. I could always just say track A and just say 2 runs of track if I wanted to, but here I have track A and track B set up as, I usually think of it as like bottom track and top track, and if I needed to, I can add some deep leg or something like that. Then we've got our board. So here I'll say on this exterior wall, I want to have 1 layer, 15 feet high, 4 by 8, and here you've got a pick list of different board types. And we build this list with you. So I can just keep it at dense glass if I wanted to. I think you said that you might change your labor above 12 feet high. So I'll say use tops above 12 feet. And then we're going to specify the finish height. In this case, I'll say 0, so it'll just pick up the rest in fire tape. Now, if I want to do the interior side of this exterior wall too, I can come over here and just say, It'll give me 12 feet high on the other side of regular old Type X board. I'll keep my tops on at 12 feet, but since it's a 12-foot wall, it won't change my labor or anything like that. And say if we're only finishing up at 10 feet, it'll pick up the remainder in fire tape here. Okay. Next, we have these other tabs where we can add other things. But before I do that, does this part make sense? Simple enough. You're just telling it your stud and track and what type of board you're using.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So some of the other things you can add here, insulation. I basically set up this one to be 6-inch insulation. The width is going to pull from my centers on the previous page. The height's going to auto feed from the height of the stud on the previous page. You can always override it if you need to. Then you have a pick list of different insulation types you want to use. Okay. And I'm just going to run through some of these other tabs to show you what else you can do. Bracing, this is for extra studs or track. If you have kickers or something like that, you can activate that here. Maybe on an exterior wall, you might want to throw in, on a 15-foot wall, we'll throw in 4 runs of cold rolled channel or black iron or spazer bar. Then we have more, just for more studs and track or furring if you have a busy wall. Layer 2, this is, we've already specified that we're using dense glass on one side and regular board on the other. What this layer 2 allows us to do is add something different. So say if I wanted some gyp sheathing or plywood underneath that dense glass, I can add a separate layer of a different type of board here. Okay. And then trims, these are for any horizontal beads that you might be adding. I basically pre-built this for a J, an L, a corner, a flex bead. These counts, these are for extra things like if you want to count up your door jambs or corner beads as part of this wall. I usually bring those in as a separate count condition and just count all the doors on a floor and all the corner beads that you need on a particular floor. And then this miscellaneous tab is for building things on the fly. So for instance, if I wanted to add something really quick here, I can say, give me 1 square foot of Tyvek wrap, or ice and water shield or whatever for every, and I'm not going to expect you to remember this part here, but I'm going to say everywhere that I'm using all the board on side A or my dense glass, I'm telling it 1 square foot of board for every square foot of side A. I'll do a material cost for that Tyvek and a labor for the Tyvek. So you can create things on the fly, or you can have things pre-built that you're just turning on or off here. But that is a basic setup of a partition. Any questions or oddball scenarios that pop up? Do you want to see how it would handle?
When you pick up on your Hilti, that the one I've seen something on the screen there that had it, but you didn't pick that up.
You mean for your fasteners?
Yeah, you shot and pin.
Yep. So I have my shots and pins coming in automatically for my track A. So I'm saying for bottom track or top track, however you want to look at them, 2 lineal feet, one shot and pin every 2 lineal feet for track A, and 1 shot and pin for every lineal foot on track B.
So if you open those up, then maybe you can specify the type of pin for each, like if you're concrete fastening the ball, you'll have the top.
Yep, absolutely. So you can come in and have a list of different fasteners that you want to use right here. And what's happening also in the background, just we don't specify, is it's automatically bringing in, based on our finish heights and everything, it's bringing in our mud, our compound, and it's also bringing in the tape for that. And it's also automatically figuring your framing fasteners and your board fasteners. You know, and the framing fasteners I can have change based on the gauge. If we want to go from, regular pan heads to, self-tapping, if it's 16 gauge, you can have it do that. The same thing goes for your board fasteners. You can have the board fasteners change based on the type of board that you're using and the gauge of the studs that you're fastening to.
And you can set it up as being conditional, so you don't have to change it every time you.
Exactly. We have something in the edge called smart fasteners, where based on what you fill out here and here, it's automatically going to pick it for you. Okay. Now, instead of having 1,000 different preset assemblies out there, some people come in and like, I have an interior partition, call it wall type A, and we'll say this is 20 gauge, 12-foot wall, board on both sides. Maybe I want to call it type X on both sides. Maybe this has insulation and sound caulking, so I turned all those on. And then based on what your partition schedule is calling for, most people will come out here and then just copy and insert. Say, all right, well, this next wall is going to be wall type B. Very similar, but maybe it's only 10 feet high and there's no insulation. So basically, you can start building your list pretty quick just using that copy and insert for your wall types. We have different types of wall types pre-set up in the edge too. So we have separate condition for metal furred walls. You know, you can pre-build some other oddball things. Say you had a shaft wall. I'll show you what that looks like. I'm basically using the same condition as my other partitions, but I'm saying 24-inch centers with 2.5-inch CH studs. Here I'm using J runner for my track instead. I've got my 1-inch core board on one side of the shaft and regular board on the other side. Any extra bracing. I actually have this J runner finagled in here so that at the end of each wall, it's adding a vertical J runner in there as well. So you can pre-build some certain assemblies that you run across a lot. But for the most part, most of our customers just have our standard exterior wall, our standard interior wall, then copy and insert them in the job based on what it's calling for. I'm just going to get rid of this one here. All right. Any questions on the partitions?
Nope, self-explanatory for now.
Good. And I'm just going to go through a few of the other condition types. So here's our soffit / bulkhead condition. All right, and here I'm just telling it for my legs. In this case, if I was doing that 6-foot drop and 2-foot return, I've got one leg that's 20 gauge, 3 5/8 6-footer. Maybe we'll order 12-footers for that. I'll say I've got another one that's 20 gauge, 2-footer, cut from 12-footers. We'll do this every 16 inches on center. Here we've got our track. So in this case, maybe I'll do 2 runs of track and 1 run of angle. Maybe that's a 2.5-inch angle or something like that. All right, so we got our leg information and then the track for the bulkhead. Any extra strengthening braces you can turn on here for extra studs. Right. And furring. Here's our board. I'll say 2 layers. We're covering this whole thing, 6 and 2. We got 8 feet of board. Type of board we're using. Here I'm saying I'm finishing all 8 feet of it. Here's my trim. So I'm going to say, give me a piece of corner bead and a little extra, 2 square foot of mud per lineal foot. So a little extra mud for that corner bead. So that's how we've got a lot of extra leg information here. So if you start working with some sort of funky step soffit, you can have most everything covered here. And if this was like a U-shaped soffit or bulkhead, you could say, oh, I've got 2 6-footers and a 2-foot joining them. Come over here and just change the number of legs. So it looks a little bit different than a partition. Next, we've got our count condition. Let me move this up a little bit. So this is, I'll use this for a column. In this case, maybe we're just straight up telling it every time we count one of these columns, what we're going to have. And I'm telling it for every column, give me 8 pieces of stud at 10 feet high and almost 1.6 or 16 feet of track for each column. I'd add any insulation or bracing. Here, I'm just telling it for my board. I've got one side 10 feet high if we're wrapping the whole thing, 10 feet high and 8 feet around. So 80 square feet basically for every one. What type of size and what type of board we're using. We're finishing all 10 feet of it. Then I'll also say for every column, give me 4 pieces of corner bead with the extra mud. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right. So we also have, using that count condition, I've got things like corner beads, all these things pre-built where I've got everything turned off except for trim. So I'm saying every time I count a corner, give me a piece of corner bead and a little extra mud for that corner bead. Or use the same thing for door jambs or door bucks. I'm saying for every door that I count, give me 2 pieces of stud, maybe a labor to set that door. Now the Edge also has a whole complete separate database for doors, frames, hardware, bathroom accessories, rough and finished carpentry, and ceilings too. So when it comes to ceilings, I just brought in a drywall grid system. When it comes to drywall ceilings, are you primarily now just mostly doing drywall on a grid system? Are you still doing like the old channel and furring ceilings at all very often?
Well, mostly grid systems, but some channel for just heavier applications.
Okay, good. So we've got most of those in there, and then specialty ceilings too. So when you're working on Armstrong, like a quick stick system or short span ceilings, you've got those in there. You've got them in there for USG too, some of their systems, USG drywall grid systems.
And you
otherwise,
guys, David, just following up on what I talked about earlier with Ken, so a lot of these systems in there, those are preloaded in Edge to begin with, right? The components, everything's already in there?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, both Armstrong and USG sent tech reps to our office to help us build them with them, so that it's pre-built with all the right parts and pieces per their specs. That holds true also for the acoustical ceilings too. So when you get into acoustical specialties like your Armstrong caps or formations or metal works or your plank systems, and the same thing goes for USG with like the Celebration, the Compasso, and the Curvatura systems. We've got those they actually sent someone down to our office to build these in here for you. Okay. But to take a look at a basic drywall system here, I'm just telling it how many layers of board I'm using, whether or not I'm finishing it. Here's my deck centers and what I'm using. So I'm saying wire gauge, 9-gauge wire, 12-foot pieces cut to 6 feet. Every 48 inches on center of my main tees, and every 24 inches of my cross tees. Then on the miscellaneous thing here, I just have it bringing in my perimeter molding based on the perimeter of each room. A pretty basic setup, but you can use the same setup also if you did channel and furring, or if you wanted a stud frame ceiling, you could turn on your stud and track. Same condition used for most drywall ceiling types. And then when it comes to the acoustical, here I've just brought in an Armstrong 2x2 system. So here's my tile type. If I went into there, the preloaded, you've got most of the tile types. Right here's USG, and you've got to run through this list. Yeah, Armstrong. So it knows that if you're using a, I don't know, 769 or something like that, that's a 2x4 Cortega. But here's my Steeris, here's fine fissured. So we've got all those preloaded in there. So here's my tile type. Oh, something else you can do if you want to have it calculate your border cuts, you can just check that box and it'll give you the lineal foot of cuts you need to make if you want to add extra time on there for that. And then we've got our grid system, and you could save grid systems together. So if I brought this in as a DX24, It knows to bring in my 424 lights and my 216s. I went back to 7300. I'll bring back my 7342s and 7328s for my long and short teeth. Again, we try to keep these lists as detailed and up to date as possible as well for our grid systems.
And if you're using the cloud version, then I would assume that as updates are made, they're rolled out to the software with your.
We make a merge available for you. It's not instantly updated in the cloud. We don't want to just arbitrarily throw things into people's databases without them knowing about it. We may do it where we can send you a merge and you can click accept and it'll dump those in there for you. But yeah, we do make them available for you, but it's not it's not yet as simple as just.
We don't want to do it under the cover of night.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened to my stuff?
Right, exactly. So, and here for this system, I've got my wire lengths when I'm cutting them to my wire centers. Here I'm telling it every time I deduct a light or a diffuser to add 2 extra wires. And here's my fasteners. If I'm just tying, I can turn it off. If not, I've got my fasteners here. If I need to add a new type of fastener, it's pretty easy to do. Just put description is, say it's a new clip. Oh, I already have one on there. So here it is. Now it shows up for everybody else to see too.
Question when it comes to acoustic ceiling.
Yes.
If we're measuring point to point, example, the room measures 90 square feet, but we know that we're going to need 100 square feet of ceiling tile. How does that accommodate that?
That segues perfectly into what I'm showing you next. So here on the increment tab is where we're setting increments. And what I have it telling it here is to use increments of 2 feet on center. And what I'm telling it here is once I go an inch over an increment of 2 feet, it's going to automatically bounce it out to the next 2 foot measurement. So say you had a corridor that was 13 feet wide. The edge is going to look at it like it's a 14-foot wide corridor and give you that much tile.
Okay, no, sounds good.
Okay, good. And if you wanted to add drywall on there, a drywall lid or insulation, you can do that as well. We even have, and I don't know if this is applicable in British Columbia, but we've gone through with the manufacturers also and set all their different seismic requirements too. So if are you in a seismic zone where you are?
We are, yeah.
Okay, good. So we've got those pre-built. If you go into our default database here, add condition, I go into my acoustical ceilings. Now if I'm going in here, here's my seismic. So here's Armstrong with the different seismic categories. Here's USG with their different seismic categories. And it's already pre-built with what type of extra struts and extra bars that you're going to need in there, or extra wires. All that's pre-built. But those are the main conditions. I mean, we can basically build anything else in here. Like I said, we've got millwork, we've got rough carpentry in there. We've got, extra what I call general conditions. And we usually have people bring these into every job. This is something that we build for each customer individually. And I'm not sure if Ken mentioned this, but with every new customer that gets the Edge, we spend 3 days with you, 2 days online and 3 days in person, building the software and teaching you how to drive it. So things like this, I have default equipment coming in. This might be a list of different cranes or lifts or dumpsters or, small tools, everything that you might bring in. We call general conditions things that you add to the job that you don't necessarily measure. Plug numbers like subcontractors or any labors like setup, safety setup, cleanup, things like that. Okay. But before I go and start doing a takeoff, any questions about the assemblies or any weird things, not weird, but any unique things that happen in British Columbia or in your area that you want to see how the Edge would handle as an assembly?
Not that I know of.
When you get in, whether interior opening door or window openings or exterior, how do you know? And we'll have engineer shop drawing. You might have a box beam header starting at 4 feet. Box beam header at 5.5 feet is going to be different gauge of studs. You get something 12 feet long. How do you count that as
so you can?
Box beam?
I would say yes and no. You can do it either or. Like you can measure the box header, and we actually have a separate condition just for a box header or box beam, where you can either measure it as a lineal footage, or you can set it up as a count and pre-set up a 4 foot, a 5 foot, you know, your different type box headers. But in our box header condition, we're basically telling it there's no board or anything like that. I'm saying give me 2 runs of 6-gauge 6-inch studs running, you know, lineal footwise, not on center, and then 2 runs of track to go with that. Some people add 3 runs of track if you want one on top pointing up or something like that. So we pre-build these, and I'm building this one to show you, and we'll measure it as a lineal foot. And we even, you know, I usually build something in here if you wanted to add a little extra time labor-wise for spot welding or something like that, you can do that too. And then as far as openings interior-wise, we do set up, if you wanted to, like a condition here. Say you're going into an existing building, or you're adding a door into an existing wall or something like that. You can pre-set up specialty conditions here. Let me see what I have. Interior. Yeah, boy. Okay. Add selected. And I preset some of these. So patch to cut door and existing wall. So this basically, I'm telling it, I'm counting it, and I'm telling it to give me, for each of these, to add in 2 extra pieces of stud, a little piece of track, and if you want, you can come into the surfaces and deduct the board, but most people are just throwing the board out. So I just have it almost like doing a door buck. Or you can have it the opposite, where you're patching to fill in an existing one, fill in an existing door. So you can just specify the size of the door and then add in a little extra board for that. So there's a lot of ways you can use these conditions to get creative. Like I said, I've for about 20 years, I've been working with the interior contractors, and I've seen some oddball things come up, but there's always seems to be a way to manipulate the edge to do it for you.
We'll build it the way you want to build.
All right, so next, once we have our list broken up, you can have your takeoff. And this is unique. This is where you can have your takeoff on one screen, and you can be building conditions on the other screen. So you don't need to pre-build this whole list before you go to the takeoff. I just did it for the sake of demonstration. But you can kind of see here, unfortunately, I can only show you one screen at a time, but you get the idea. You can actually slide your takeoff onto one monitor while you're building your conditions on the other monitor. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And most of you work with a dual monitor setup there?
Yes.
Good. Now I've seen people using this with 3 monitor setups. And you can actually use the edge that way too. And I'll show you what I mean. If I'm back here and I'm looking at say I want to take a look at my details. You can actually have your details open on a 3rd screen and have your takeoff on another screen, and you're building your conditions on the middle screen if you want to do something like that. Now I'm going to go into the takeoff here. It's not going to let me do any takeoff because the scale hasn't been set yet. So I'm just going to come down here to my scale and calculate it. You can always double check and just type in a scale if you're out here and just choose an existing scale. I think it's good to come out and double check any of the measurements here. Say that was 61 feet, quarter-inch scale. So it's always good to double check, I think, because who knows how that print became digital. Sometimes there's services that scan them in, and sometimes they lose their scale when they scan them. So I say to double check. So now this is what I'm measuring here. It'll tell me here. It'll also tell me here. I can choose my color for this wall, how thick the line's going to be. You know, maybe I want a double line. I'm just going to come around and start measuring. I don't know. Can you hear those beeps at all?
No, I got the volume turned off because we're on phone for audio.
Okay, very good. So it's giving you a tone for each point that you're touching, and I'm just measuring beginning and end, and it's starting to add up my total lineal footage here.
Does it use snap conditions similar to what AutoCAD does? Like
yeah, once you have it measured, I mean, unfortunately, this PDF is just a image that we're tracing on in the background. But once you have things measured in there, it'll snap to points that you've already touched. See how it's grabbing that little box around there?
Yeah, it looks fairly accurate. Does it move at all to the to ends of lines? I see a little circle around your mouse there.
Yeah. So. Oh, so I'm sorry. What was that question again? You saw? Oh, yeah. I see the rough circle around there. Yeah. That circle is really for what we call X-ray. So if I have, say, I measured an area, and I'll just use for instance, say I had a drywall grid ceiling in this room here. That circle is letting me see what's underneath the takeoff in case you need to see what's in there.
Gotcha.
Just to jump ahead for a second, I'm going to come back and start doing some more takeoff. But what's already happening in the background and what makes the edge unique is that the estimate and the takeoff are tied together. So already, just based on what we've measured so far, it's starting to build our material list as far as for that drywall system, what type of tees we're going to need. Here's my exterior stud and track and board, my mud and tape. Here's the extra fasteners. So it's building this list for us as we're doing the takeoff. Okay. Where most other softwares out there, you've got a measuring tool, measuring program, and then you have a separate takeoff program. The edge is all in one. You don't have to worry about transposing numbers between the two or anything like that. If I made a mistake, like I did on that wall there, I forgot to go all the way out, I can just come over here, click on that line, see a little circle show up and drag it out to where it's supposed to be. So it's easy to fix errors. I'm not going to do a 100% accurate takeoff here. I'm just trying to get some numbers in for the sake of demonstration here. I'm going to run in and measure my walls. And you can change, say this was a fire rated wall or something like that. You could change it to red, or if it was a interior MR board, you can change it to a blue or something like that. All right. I'm just going to get some walls measured here. Zooming in and out using my mouse wheel makes it easier to manipulate and go along if you really want to get super detailed in your takeoff. Which, why not? If you can, you might as well. So here, maybe I have some soffits in this room, so I'll go to my soffit. Should have done that earlier. Show how I want to look. So you're just going to measure the lineal foot of the soffit. This third point for depth really is just for aesthetics to make this look like something other than a wall. We've already told it that we have a 2-foot return. So. Okay. Got those. For drywall, you saw if I had drywall ceilings, I can measure around the perimeter. Just hit enter to finish it off. Or if you have a lot of these rooms that are square or rectangle, you can just click on this rectangle and just do 2 points. 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm measuring each area separately so it can calculate the perimeter angle. So that rectangle feature can really, and see how it's snapping to those corners now. Snap, snap, snap. Get the idea there for the acoustical. If I had an acoustical ceiling in here, it's going to snap to places that I've already taken off. Change my fill ratio here. So compared to any of the on-screen measuring tools that you've used in the past, does this look similar?
Yeah, it's smoother than what I've seen in the past.
Good.
Well, it's just smoother, corner to corner, like create shapes and things.
Back when I started with the Edge in 2001, the state-of-the-art thing was these giant digitizer boards. I don't know if anybody remembers seeing those, where you can lay your paper prints down and you had this little stylus that you touched down and it took the measurements that way.
Yeah.
It's come a long way since then. And it's made it a lot easier for me to travel now because I don't have to lug one of those boards around with me everywhere.
So you could literally do your takeoff all on computer.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. But not just that. You can start it here and take your laptop and sit in the living room.
Yeah.
You can open the estimate, which is why Brian uses a big light, works from there.
You could project it onto your TV if you want and do it that way. The kids will love that.
Right now, you're just picking up corners?
Yeah, I'm just going around and touching my corners for the extra corner bead. And I'll grab my doors. You could choose how you want them to look. If you want it to look something more like a door or something like that. Counting up the extra studs I might need. Okay. Maybe put a couple there. Okay. So we've got some measurements. I don't really have any columns, but I'll count a couple of them here. And the box headers. So this is what we were talking about earlier. So let me change the colors of these box headers. Brown. And then you can come along. And if you want to be able to see a little bit better, you can gray out everything but what you measure.
What are you doing?
Right, that way we're just seeing the condition that we're currently measuring. Or you can look at everything as a whole here. Okay. Some of the other things that you can do that are kind of nifty on this drawing screen, if you had a particular detail that you wanted to reference, you can come over here and call this detail J or whatever and link it to another print. That way, if it's, say this is something you bid 3 months ago and it comes back for rebid, you can come over here and, why did I do that? And click on this detail and have it open it up on the other screen for you. And here's your details, and look at that. You can even, if you wanted to create a separate print just for this detail C, you could come over here and crop this out. Name it detail C. Now it's its own print, so if you wanted to reference that over here, detail C, you can drop that in there. So basically the point is you can create hyperlinks from your takeoff screen. Now it's going here to detail C, to other prints if you needed to. Also, you can create hyperlinks to web pages. So if you're, say you're working on a new type of Armstrong ceiling and you wanted to reference the details or something like that, just create the link or copy it from where you are. You can create a little web icon out there. So when you click on that, it takes you out to wherever you want to go to. So some other references, some other cool things here before I go to the pricing. If I'm back in my list, let me go back here to the list of conditions that I brought in for that page. All right. I'm going to copy these conditions. Now, so you don't have to build them for every page. Now I'm going on to my second page here. Okay, my ground, say this was it, and I'm going to paste those conditions that I already created in there. Okay, good. So now when I come out to this, I've got all my conditions, and you can either have it, I made a mistake and I copied the measurements out there, but now when I go out to my takeoff, the only reason I wanted to show you this is there's a neat little feature for takeoffs like this. So if I'm working on an area like over here, I'm in a new scale. We have something in the edge called convert to arc. So if you have any radiuses, you can come over here, click on the beginning point of any radius, any point along that radius, and the end point, and you can hit this little guy or the letter K, and it automatically creates that correct curve for you there. The same thing goes if you're measuring a wall type. I just need to be in length mode, so I can go beginning point, middle point, end point, hit the letter K, boom. That's how we handle radiuses in there. And you can also pre-set up that condition, or pre-set up a radius wall if you wanted to, where you have like flex track or something like that. Okay. But going back to my first page here, any questions on the takeoff portion of the program? There you go. So now I've got my things. You can also make notes if you wanted to, or highlight certain areas. You can highlight and say you had a note you wanted someone to pay attention to, or you can come out and type in your own particular here. Note this. Move that around. Not a good typist. All right. So now we've done our takeoff. We're going to go to the next step, which is our pricing. So the Edge will create this price list for you. Let me know when it comes up because there's a slight delay. Can you see this?
Yep.
Okay. So here's all of our different types of board: exterior stud, exterior track, how many pieces you're going to need of it. It's not just a linear footage of stud or track. We're telling you literally how many pieces you're going to have. And if you don't want these oddball numbers, you can take everything, round it up to the nearest whole amount. So here's what we're putting here. Okay. You can control what columns you'd like to see here. So now I've got where I can adjust my waste percent. You know, when it comes to our board, maybe we want a 5% waste on everything there. I already have that pre-built in there, but you can change it on a per job basis. 101% waste. Yeah, I say that. Really. Now, say I want these to be my waste percents for all future jobs. I can mark those items, come up here to send a database, and I can send that waste percent back to the database. Same thing goes with pricing. If I needed to get up-to-date prices from my supplier, I can just download this.
Sorry, Dave, I think we're just waiting for something to catch up here. The screen's kind of froze.
Uh-oh, okay, let me.
Yeah, go ahead. Just one of those percentages had a infinite number of 9s in it. So,
Let's see. Now it looks like I'm still.
we're still at the board waste.
Yeah, let me.
Oh, yeah, just lock the screen.
Okay, now see if I can bring it back up and if we're in real time. Okay.
Yeah, you're moving the mouse around again.
Okay. So I was saying, if you change a price or waste percent and you want it to remember that for another job, you just mark the one that you changed and hit the send to database, and it will remember that. That's how you get it to remember or set your standard pricing up. Pretty
So
impressive,
so on your unit price,
Mm-hmm.
is that labor and material, or is that labor or material?
This is just material at this point. Do you price
Okay.
your material separate than your labor?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So we're just looking at material at this point. We'll have a separate
Okay.
labor screen here that we'll work with. And if you wanted to, so here's those other things like cranes and dumpsters that I brought in there, and then some acoustical items. And say if you didn't need these on this particular job, I like to bring them in there because at least it makes you think about it. And then you could turn off the ones that you don't need. Say, all right, I just want it in there for my dumpster, and I'll throw in $350 for a dumpster. And if you wanted to get up-to-date pricing from your supplier, hit the Excel and send pricing. You can send that into Excel and then email that to your supplier to type in up-to-date pricing for you. Opening up on my other screen. And you could decide which columns you want to send. When we send it out to Excel, we send it with all the columns, but you could decide which ones you want to send over to your supplier. I do that because I know in certain markets where we have a lot of edge users that I've seen the suppliers actually shop the order quantities around to other subs. So you can maybe hide the actual order quantity and just ask them to give you a unit price or something like that.
I tend to use a large rounding figure when I send it out.
Very good. Or you can even come over here and mark your waste and mark everything up 20% before you send it out if you want to. My wife, her family was electrical contractors in Edmonton before moving to the States, and I used to see some. He told me some funny stories of how people would hide their numbers. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there.
Yes, it is.
So now we get our material pricing. We also have something in the edge where you can tell it where you want it to fall into. I don't know if you have different accounting codes or cost codes set up for different material types and different labor types. Okay, so we can build your account codes into the edge. It's fairly simple. We just go in and I have something simple here where I've just got a few codes put in. And then you can, from the pricing screen, if you wanted to, you can adjust them on a per job basis. Or what most people do is at the beginning, once you start to assign those numbers for things, you can send those account codes back to the database. So I just mark those two, send the database, and send those account codes so it remembers it for future jobs. So we can align the edge items with your cost codes if you want to. That way, if you eventually want to interact the edge with your accounting system and send budget information in there, we could do that. Do you know what accounting software you're using?
We use Sage.
Okay. So a lot of those systems we've already built exports for. We just have to verify. Unfortunately, no one export works for everybody because you may have your Sage product set up a little bit differently than others, so we just have to make sure that data sets match. So from the pricing screen, you can set your material pricing. You can ask for prices from your supplier. You can add waste percents. You can change your account codes. Any questions on the material pricing?
Just one on the like your general condition riders down there.
Uh-huh.
when you're setting conditions to those, like say scissor lifts, for example, when you set in your back in your partitions where you can change the labor rate over a certain height,
Mm-hmm.
can you create a condition? So say your scissor lift is only applying to the portion over 12 feet?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we did when we set up those conditions. So for instance, that dense glass that we did in the exterior wall here, and I kind of breezed through that, but what we're saying here is when we set up this wall, saying one layer 15 feet high, size and type of board that we're using. And here I'm saying use above tops above 12 feet. So now this will essentially, and I'll show you in a minute here, give us a labor for framing or hanging the board up to 12 feet. And it'll call that hang bottoms to 12 feet. And then it'll say hang tops from 12 to 15 feet and ask you to put in a different production rate for that. Okay.
Yeah, so I was wondering is how that, so the extra general condition items now, so cleanup and all that, what are they calculating on?
Whatever you want them to. I have them just set up as plug numbers right now, but if you want us to add up the total square footage of drywall, and we can have a cleanup based on the total square footage of drywall, the Edge has a way of tracking all of that for you.
What I was wondering, so you could pull out your hours for all labor attributed to work over 12 feet then?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know that being said, you can get as specific or non-specific as you want with that, because I can also have it add up all of my hours for framing and then have a framing supervision based on those hours, all my hours for hanging board, and have a separate supervision just for a hanging supervision. That, and now that I'm on the labor screen now, we're in blue, so this means we're in labor. Before I show this to you, or as I show this to you, I just want to reiterate that we custom build the labor for every customer. So, you know, out of all those, the people up there that are using the Edge Legacy or Pro West or Sunco or whatever, all those guys have a different Edge license, basically. They all have the same, or Edge program. They all have the same Edge, but we custom built the labor for the way they want to look at it, however detailed or however general you want to look at it. In this case, I just have my safety set up and things like that, or things like cleanup, just as a general plug number. So if I wanted to just throw in, you know, man days, 3 or 5 man days for cleanup, I could do that. Or I can have it based on the square footage of drywall and say, you know, give me 3 cents of cleanup time for every square foot of drywall that we have. That make sense?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Other than
and if you don't,
unit ratio.
yeah, and that's the other thing. So I set this up so framing the walls, you know, half of our customers look at framing. So here, let's just take this line: frame 20 gauge 3 5/8 wall to 10 feet with 16-inch centers. Tells you how many square feet we have, estimated units in square feet. So now we can either say how many square feet we can do per hour, how many square feet we can do per man day. Some places like in Florida, they'll even just come in here and put in a cost per square foot to do that. Okay. So
you enter any one of the fields and then the other ones propagate from there?
Exactly. And so what I was saying is that half of the country looks at it by the square foot of framing, other half looks like at the lineal foot of wall, and then they say how many lineal foot they can get done. And then other people, there's a contingency of interior contractors out there that do their framing labor based on the lineal foot of metal. So we customize it the way you want it to look. I think on your questionnaire you said that you look at framing by the square foot. Is that correct?
Well, most commonly, yeah.
Okay. So say you had a 20 gauge wall, 20 gauge 3 5/8 wall to 10 feet. How would you figure the labor on that? Would you say square foot per hour or square foot per day?
55 cents on a unit price, 55 cents per square foot.
Okay, cool. So if I went 55 cents a square foot, so this is cost per EU's estimated unit, in this case it's square foot. So 55 cents a square foot, that gives me a net cost of $1,172. Now, if you have a pay rate put in there for your carpenter rate, or for your framers, it's going to take that cost, divide it by the cost per hour, and over here say that's going to be 16 hours. Well, at 16 hours, you're at 127 square feet per hour, or 1,000 square feet per man day.
So if I said hourly rate at $30,
so
and we're talking base labor rate.
Yep.
So
let me put this back to 55 cents. Now, at $30 an hour, we're at 39 hours, or 54 square feet per hour here, or per man days. Or you can come over here and override this and say, let's just do 5 man days. Well, that's going to adjust now to 56 cents per square foot. Or you can just come in here and say, let's charge $1,500 for that. Now we're at 70 cents a square foot and 50 man hours. So you can preset any of these. Say this 55 cents a square foot is your standard for framing. You can mark those, send them to database, and put that for your production rate or cost there. It's going to say sent those back, and it's going to remember that 55 cents for future jobs. That way, if you set that as your standard and you're reviewing a bid that someone else did or that even you did yourself, so that 55 cents is my standard, and I change it to 60 on this job, 60 cents. It's going to come over here and tell me that I slowed down the production rate by 8% from what my standard was in there. So all these are back calculating. Your constant will be your cost per hour and how much you have to do. Everything else, let me change these columns up a little bit too. You're not worried about crew size or estimated unit per crew day or crew days. So you can only have it show the ones that matter to you. So you can customize the look of this screen. So does it make sense that the constant is your measurement and your pay rate? Everything else back calculates according to what cell you're filling out?
Yep. So your net cost, that's before like unemployment insurance, Canada pension, workers' compensation?
Absolutely. If you wanted to, I mean, that's depends on how you want to do it, to be honest with you. I mean, you could have, you could have that be the loaded rate.
You say your payroll burdens is another $5 per hour, right?
Right. So you can either put that in your hourly rate. I'll show you at the end too, in what we call our recap, where you're doing your markups, and you could put in your burdens and any tax rates or extra overheads that you might have.
So we have tax rate.
Is there a question?
Oh, I was just talking about a sales tax rate on materials.
Okay, cool. I'll show you where we can do that. So you can either put that in your rate as you're doing your material or labor, or we do give you a spot at the end where you can put all those markups in. I'm just coming through. So we try to do it in order. So here we've got frame, insulate, our different hang labor, and here's that hang bottoms to 10 feet. Let me make this description a little longer. All right. And dense glass bottoms to 12 feet. And here's another line. So you could say 10 cents, whatever, for that. Say that's a little aggressive. Let's say, I'm used to looking at it over here. So let's say 30 cents a square foot for the bottoms. And then here's our dense glass exterior tops from 12 to 15 feet. So it broke out the top separate, and you can put in your rate for that separately. Does that kind of answer your question from earlier?
Yep.
Excellent. You can even do the same thing too, where you've got finished bottoms, but maybe finishing above a certain height is going to cost more.
So just back when I asked earlier, David. So going back to say the above 12 feet there. So you're bored from 10 to 12 or 12 to 15. So how would I, how would I say I want to add scissor lip rental applicable to those hours only?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so I can create a separate user code, and this is kind of getting into, yes, I could say, yes, we can do that, but I can have a user code for just tops labor and have it start to calculate all the hours for tops labor throughout all my conditions, and then have that hours for tops labor feed into your scissor lifts if you'd like.
Okay.
That's in part of setup here. I could show you how to do it right now. It'd take like 15 minutes, and I run the risk of making your eyes cross a little bit.
No, I just want to know we can do it. I mean, if we choose to go ahead with this, it's something that I know that we can do on the setup days.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's some other items. Say I don't want to worry about these. I'm just going to turn them off for now. Supervision was one of those extra ones that I brought in. Right. So once we're done with our labor, and again, you can have your labor items for different framings and hanging. Go to whatever cost codes you've assigned on there. All right. Okay. And have it match up there. We also have our user codes, and I'll show you how your account code report would look, but I'll use my user codes to show you that. So next we're coming up, and we've got our subdivisions here. So I've got drywall, and I've got acoustical as a separate subdivision. Some people like to break those out separately because they may have different markups for acoustical. Maybe you get a better profit margin on acoustical than you do on drywall, or you can have it all be in one subdivision if you wanted to. Okay. So now we're looking at material, my subtotal for material. Here you can come in and put a tax rate. You can have as many markups as you want. You could have standards out here, like some people will put a escalator under material for, based on when you bid the job and when you're running the job. All right, so it's going to recalculate that. And for labor, you can set up all of your different markups there as well. See, I had some defaults come in for burden, workers' comp. These are, FICA, FUTA, SUTA. Kind of states things. Sorry. All right. Does that show you where you can do your markups for your different labor types? You can even, if you wanted to, say your overhead or your burden was more for your hangers than for the framers. You could start to set different markups for your framing labor than from your hanging labor or from your tapers.
Now, do you have a delivery on there for delivery of drywall to site?
No, we can add that as one of our general conditions. Okay. Or how do you figure delivery right now? Is it a percentage or is it based on the
by 1,000
square
feet?
We pay cost per foot per plate.
Okay, so again, just like with the cleanup or any of them, I can have the edge calculate the total square footage of drywall and use that as a factor to calculate your delivery fees. And then over here, go ahead.
You guys don't by chance load the unit weights of the steel product in there, do you? Can you we don't at this point. We've had people ask that before, and I don't know if they've done it or not. I've never done it myself over the years. And we actually worked with out of Ohio, Worthington Steel, that was a manufacturer, and I think they actually built their own equations based on the lineal foot by gauge. Yeah.
If it was
I've got to calculate it sometimes for calculating trucking for stuff we do in remote locations.
That's interesting. I'm sure we could do it. I mean, we already know the gauge. We already know the width of the stud. If we can calculate that into a weight times the lineal footage, I'm sure we could do it. I'm just being honest with that. I've never done it myself. I'm sorry?
It's okay. That was just a tangent.
And just to go on another tangent here, what I've done recently with another customer is, and I kind of totally went over these, but we have these extra little fields up here. And I've built with customers in the past where we're doing the mills here, the flange width here, and the galvanized level here. And you can have all of those factor into your weight if you wanted to, and your description. You know, because you might have certain studs that are, you know, your exterior studs may have a different galvanized level than your interior studs.
Yeah.
Be able to calculate that. And any of these fields up here, I can name whatever I wanted to. I can come over here and say that's mills and start to have a list of mills. I can come over. This is where the real customization comes in, flange width, and start to have these all fill out as other conditions, you know, or other descriptors for metal or whatever I want them to be. Some people will come out here and add in a let me do this, finish level. Oh, I already have one out there for that. Let me come in here. Probably over here. Finish level. There it is. And so you can have a level 4 finish, level 5 finish, orange peel, knockdown, or whatever, and have that feed into the description of your labor for your finish. So kind of going off there, there's a lot of customizing and cool things that we can do. Also at the labor level, before I go on to our reports, at the labor level, any of these labors, you can have it automatically change your cost. 55 cents is what we put in there for 20 gauge 3 5/8 12 footer. But maybe if it's 20 gauge 3 5/8, 15 feet and over, you might want to charge more. So you can have it automatically change your rates based on certain criteria. We have something unique to the Edge, and it's trademarked called the Smart Labor, where you can have it automatically adjust your rates based on whatever criteria you want. I usually start this off with people when they want to try using Smart Labor by saying, how long does it take you to frame a wall? And the first question is like, well, maybe how high is the wall? And the next question might be, what gauge studs are you using, or materials are you using? Next is, what are my centers?
You can populate your database then with some of those criteria, up to 12, up to 16, whatever, and put them in. And
yep. Yeah. So and have it even be smart, up to 12, up to 16, above 20, and then have that apply to 20 gauge, 22 gauge, 25 gauge, 16 gauge, 18 gauge at each of those levels, maybe even 16, and then have the width of the stud be another descriptor. So it's our width of the.
Once it's saved in your database, that'll populate into any new job that you bring that wall type into, or you set that
exactly, condition. Exactly, and that's where this comes down. A lot of people, I have some customers that have very extensive baseline rates put in there for their production. Really, it helps new estimators get acclimated to the labor a lot quicker. And from a review standpoint, if they change it on a per job basis, you can tell over here just by looking if they change it up or down from what my baseline rate was. Okay. So that's an advantage. We usually don't get that detailed during the initial training and setup, but it's one of those things that's a free part of the Edge. And you know, as you use it more and more, you might want to make it, in our case, smarter and smarter. You know. But go ahead, question.
Oh, just looking at the productivity percentages there. You could apply a universal, just say, okay, I'm working on a hospital rental, so I want to use all my base rates at 60% of normal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Rather than changing other individual.
I had a customer in Calgary. I'll remain anonymous to protect the innocent, but they called it the Randy factor. And whatever one of their superintendents or foreman, Randy, was running the job, they knew everything was going to run 15% slower. So they'd mark everything and slow the production rate down by 50%.
That's brilliant.
Okay. So now getting into back to the recap. For each subdivision, you can have your own default markups. You can set overhead and profit. You can have profit levels be a certain profit on top of material, a certain profit on top of labor, or you can just have it as a whole. You can look at it by profit, which is just a straight percentage markup, or you can look at it by profit to sell, which is kind of your profit margin. So there's different ways to play with these. You can set up your defaults and then change them on a per job basis. Then that gives you to your total selling price. And then for the acoustical, you can have your own set of markups. You've got your selling price here. It's going to give you kind of an average of your total cost per square foot of acoustical. We're back at drywall. Here it's saying, based on this, here's our total square foot of drywall, and we're basically saying $8.80 per square foot of drywall for this job as a whole. Some people like to come in there and just override that number and say, that's not enough, let's just make it $9 per square foot of drywall. All right, so it's going to recalculate. And basically, instead of, that's just arbitrarily changing it to $9 per square foot. Now we're at 27.8% markup instead of 25%.
So what else you guys doing here? I'm just buying a quarter $1.80 a square foot. That includes your markup.
Right, right. Oh, I remember. I'm just putting fake numbers in here, but that 27%, that's markup. That's pretty typical, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what trade?
Where
Yeah, right. Right, exactly. Well, maybe right. Well, you know, we do work with certain trades. Like we work with fireproofing contractors. They actually get a really decent markup on there. But yeah, I mean, even in the States on the drywall side, bigger jobs, you're lucky to get 5 to 10% on there. But now
5 to 10% overhead and profit.
That, yeah, well, it depends on how you look at it. Some people do a certain overhead and then a smaller profit, but yeah, I would say combined, you know, maybe 15% total.
Combined 15%. But
yeah,
if you're
overhead,
taking on,
overhead.
you know, if you had a $5 million drywall contract, I suspect the markup, total markup 8 to 10%.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. And yeah, so we work with, I've been working with a guy in Baltimore, Maryland area, and all they do is they don't look at a job under $15 million. And their margins are a lot smaller, but you know, 5% of a $25 million job is pretty good.
Yeah.
But, and we'll get into a separate thing. We actually have an app for the iPad where you can send your information into the field and they can start tracking production as it's being done, and you can start to find out if you're on target for your labor and whatnot. That's another demo if you want to look at it. But just want to show you some of the reports that you can work with here. You can custom build any reports, plus we have some that are pre-built out here, and any of these reports. So let's take this consolidated report. This is what most people will use with your account codes to do their budget in their accounting software. So this is going to be the code, everything under the code, the total for that code. Here's grid labor, total dollars for that. So you might just want the code and the dollar amount, the code and the dollar amount, and we can create a report like that. Any of these reports that we create can be sent into a CSV, a Word, a PDF, or an Excel file. So, you know, some people will do their stocking report, and then, or maybe you want to stock it by page, and then send that into an Excel file and create a purchase order that way. We also have takeoff reports. So if you want to send this, it's basically doing your takeoff on top of the blueprint, and then a color-coded legend for what each color represents and what their measurements are. This recap report is kind of giving you an overview of that last page with the markups that we looked at. Here's our markups. Again, you can send any of these into any old format. You can even have a job packet that you want to share with somebody with the most important reports, just generate one PDF of all those reports in it if you wanted to.
Can you show me this? Say you wanted to order just the steel. How do you produce the purchase order for steel?
Sure. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. You can either come out here to your pricing screen and just mark your steel items. Say I just want steel, and I'll come down through studs. And you can just go out and create an Excel file of just those items right there. All right. Or you can have, yeah, wow, that's pretty impressive. But yes, so you can have your stocking report, and just to kind of go into these, you can sort them however you want. This is just my thing, and I'm going to go in and design this report. And did someone say by user code?
Yeah, just call your user code for what.
Like our steel studs are only code 300, eh? So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think now that's exactly what you do. Is you come out here, and then you're going to sort it by user code instead of by page or whatever you have it set. Whoever said that, you should be part of that initial training, because that's that's a fairly advanced thing, and it just came off of it with the top of your head there. That's pretty good. So now you can have this report sorted instead by user code. So here's all just my framing materials, or just my exterior framing materials.
Gives you exactly what it is and how many pieces by length and everything.
Exactly. So here's, the 10-foot stud, 10-foot track, 12-foot studs, and how many pieces of each. And you can export these into Excel and create a purchase order that way. But that's
customizable.
All those reports are customizable. We'll teach you while you're here how to create new reports, but most people will just take one of our existing reports. That's the most similar. I mean, we'll take here's a condition summary report, but you usually grab the one that's most similar to what you want to do, and then copy it and change it. So this is basically a report that's taken each assembly, wall type A, lineal footage, material cost, labor cost, my average cost per lineal foot or square foot, if you wanted to say that, before markup and after markup. Or you can get into super detailed report, this is our condition detail. This is basically taking every assembly that you have out there, and it's going to, just for this one job, it's going to be 4 pages. So it's saying, here's my column, everything material and labor wise I need in that column, the total cost for the column. Here's my acoustical system, everything in there. So we go from super detailed to more general reports. And again, we have a custom report designer, so you can design your reports as needed. Okay. But that is kind of the high level, 500 feet above view of what the Edge can do. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that we can get into and a lot of customization that we can do. I usually don't get into that during the demo, just because I don't want to overwhelm you with things that it can do, but the possibilities are endless.